I'm Tom Vasel, and today I'm talking to two very, very different people. We're talking to John Clowdus and to Travis Chance. Now, together, they make, well, some sort of half Voltron type thing.
Yeah.
Before we jump into this game, let's talk about who you guys are and what you do. So we'll start with you.
So I work for Kolossal Games. I'm the president of the company. I've been working in gaming for the last 6 years, designing games, developing games, but I mostly develop and I'm a publisher.
And Kolossal Games is known for?
Western Legends is our big flagship game. We've done a ton of games, though. We recently managed the Eclipse Kickstarter as well. So yeah, we're pretty busy people.
What about you? What company do you run?
I own Small Box Games. I started in 2007, mainly doing small card games, short run. Then Kolossal purchased the rights to the Small Box catalog last year, and they're in the process of re-releasing some of the stuff. And one of the first things we did was start working on my first big box game, which is Mezo. Travis gave me a line to try this, and I said okay, and that's where we're at.
So John was just slightly ahead of the curve with Kickstarter, doing these indie small games back in the day, those small box games, because they were literally in small boxes.
Yeah.
Right, and so then you really like these games, so you brought him on board with Kolossal.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've been doing Kickstarter since 2014. I'm a fan of John's, admittedly. So I've got a lot of his games from over the years as a backer. And one of the very first things when I was talking about who we wanted to work with, who we wanted to kind of align ourselves with, was with John. So I think we actually already had the agreement in place before we even made an initial official announcement about Kolossal. Like we had already talked
we had figured it out.
Figured everything out. So yeah.
Yeah, it was cool.
So what made you transition, because you do all these small games, what made you decide to do a big one?
I had the means to do it with Kolossal. I mean, this is something I could have. I've always wanted to do a big game like this. I like miniatures. I grew up playing Warhammer 40K, got into Heroescape. So I mean, I've always wanted to do a miniatures game. But with Small Box, I did everything domestically, and it's pretty much impossible to do a game of this scale manufacturing domestically. And like I said, Travis said, "See what you can do," and this is what I did. So it's kind of cool.
Well, speaking of that, I guess we should at this point explain what is Mezo. What is this game about? What's a summary of that?
So Mezo is it's an area control game where the players are going to take on the role of a Mayan god. They're going to have a little group of followers. It's area control, but not in the I think the typical sense. John has come up with some interesting twists and turns, which he is known for doing. So one of the neatest things I think about the game is that in the conflicts that you fight, the winner gets the reward tile here, the altar they call it. But then the player who has the most, there's two different types of units. There's the warriors and shamans. Whoever has the most shamans in the region then gets to take one of their units, put it over here, trigger this little ability, and get some points. And then the same for the warriors. So there's almost like there's three different ways to win fights. So you could sneak in and be losing completely. He could have 13 strength in a region. I go, cool, I have one shaman and no one else thought to put a shaman there. This is the only one that survived. And I'm going to go over here and now I'm going to get an ability and get some points at the end of the round. So there's lots of really interesting ways, I think, to play the game on different levels.
And if you want, you can see us playing a game of this. We play through a full game of it with the designer, and you'll see if he won or if I won, or maybe someone else. But that's not the point. So what was your design process for this? What made you decide to pick this?
I did Omen with the Greek mythology, and I've always been interested with the Central American religion, the ancient religions of the Mayans and the Aztecs, and nobody's really done a game like this. Like with this really tapped into that theme, and it's really cool. I mean, there's the culture itself is awesome, but like you get into the mythology of it, and there's just these massive like celestial beings that are in control of all this stuff. And it's really cool. They got different gods for different things. I don't know. It just seemed like something that deserved to have a game this size, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, typically when you think of the Aztec and Mayan games, there's some sort of like a Euro-y, resource management. You're getting resources and building pyramids or something like that. And this game touches upon those elements, but it's more of a conflict-driven game.
Right, and which the Mayans were known for building, but they are also known for conflict and being a blood culture. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's the perfect thing to make a board game out of. I mean, it's just really cool, and hopefully, people will see this and say, I want to know more about Mayan mythology, and they'll take the time to learn about these gods and the culture, because it's such a rich culture with a lot of cool stuff going on.
Really, really great opportunity for the miniatures. Yeah, really gigantic.
Well, this is a pretty fantastic miniature, and this is pretty close to what it's going to look like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the resin cast for that will be that was used to make the molds. So, I mean, we've got some really, like when you played, you were Ixchel, which you have like a waterfall coming out of your head that's wrapping around, that's making the moon that you're sitting on. I've never seen anything like that before, and a lot of these deities in this culture really interesting. And the artist Daryl did a fantastic job of taking them and kind of imagining them in the form of miniatures, really cool table presentation, etc. Of course, the guy throwing the Olmec head.
Well, in this game, each god is very unique.
Yeah.
Okay, so the base game's coming with these 4 very different gods. Mm-hmm. They each have a hand of 6 cards, and these cards, while there's similarities from god to god, they have some similar actions.
Sure.
They're different. So how was there difficulties in trying to balance this to make these guys work together?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the cool thing is the core 75% of the mechanics that we originally talked about and I designed and I presented to Travis, they're still here. The majority of the game was balancing, like you said, these gods and the different little vectors in the game to make it to where if you chose Capricorn, you weren't totally outclassed by one of the other gods who had a more specific thing. Like when you played Ixchel, she has a focus on shamans. Kukulkan has a focus on warriors. So it's a balancing issue, and like you said, watch the video. You can see how the different gods play against each other. It was cool. I mean,
we started off too meek with the sort of asymmetry. Then we went way too wide, and it was crazy asymmetrical. So then we kind of found that Goldilocks zone. But it 9 months of work, really hard work, playtesting and grinding. And the game, when you're playing it, you're like, wow, this is a lot. But the reality is, vector-wise, there's not a lot of vectors. There's adding guys, removing guys. There's like the managing of your guys, moving them around, moving your gods. This track. There's like 6 or 7 vectors when you have each god has 5 cards with 3 options on it for a total of like 122, or 100 or however many once we unlock all the gods and the ones in the expansions and stuff. There's lots and lots of options, and there's very, very few actual repetition of abilities. Right. They're almost entirely different.
Just
from
small
god to
things,
god.
like when you play, there's small things that affect, one god may be able to affect all regions. Another god may have a similar ability that's slightly more powerful that can only affect a single region. So it's a balancing act of making sure that everybody's got something you can always do, which I think we did a good job with that. There's always something to do on your turn.
And everybody has every player will have a moment where the other players go, wait, you can do that? Wait, what is this thing that you just did that seems entirely unfair? And you're like, yeah, that's my power. Remember earlier when you did the really unfair thing and it made me sad? So yeah, there's an interesting dynamic in that, and I would say that was the biggest challenge in actually developing the game and testing the game is having that sort of personality, and also so it didn't just feel like mechanisms. This Capricorn's an earthquake god, so what does he do? He moves units around the board. He shakes them up. He's moving things. He's destroying things. Apuk is a god of death, so she's getting units back from this Jabulba area, which is also, I think, a pretty neat aspect of the game, and sending people there, killing people, smiting them rather.
Yeah, so you mentioned the vectors, right? And there's the gods and other powers, but there's also a lot of variety in the game because the map will change. Mm-hmm. What victory points things are given out, which can dramatically change. And then each person has their own player board where everyone has the same options, but this is a bit of a way to customize the way you want to play.
Yeah, John said it great earlier. This is a way to make up for any sort of deficit you feel your god might have. You're like, oh, well, my guy's not very good at getting units back. Well, then you might want to pick the Awaken ability in the first stage because that's going to give you 6 units. And there's even like really kind of elegant, beautiful math here. It's like these 3 abilities, they're wildly different, but they all provide a total of +6 strength over the course of the game, right? I'm going to get 6 strength worth of units back. I'm going to build 6 strength worth of glyphs, and my champion's going to get a total of 6 buff of 6 strength over the course of the game. Each one of these is, I think, very simple, but they Lego block together in this really interesting way that even when you're playing, you're like, well, I wasn't actually thinking I was going to do that, but maybe actually I'm going to choose this ability and fight for this part of the the majorities aspect of the game, because I'm noticing that other people really aren't focusing on the majority aspect. So we kind of, the term we use is meta-tactical. So the game has a tactical element. You have a plan. Your god is really good at something, but you're not on rails. You're predisposed.
Yeah.
You're not
It's
forced
liquid.
to do something.
I mean, you're able to, change your, if you so choose to, change your strategy from age to age, sometimes from conflict to conflict, if you think it's going to be beneficial. But sometimes, there's gambles because everybody else at the table is trying to win too. So
now, if I'm talking to someone about this game, what kind of person would you recommend this for? Is like, if you like this game, you would like Mezo. If you like these mechanisms.
So I mean, I think any person who's a fan of these big box, miniature style games, like Blood Rage or Rising Sun or something.
Kemet, things like that.
Kemet, yeah.
it's definitely a dudes on a map kind of
game. The game that we actually compare it the most to in testing, me and the other developers, was Dominant Species, because it's got that give and take, like where if you want to win here, you're going to lose there type feeling. So I think any players who like conflict-driven games, risk plus games, as I call them, I think are gonna really like this, because I think it's doing some things that differently, better, uniquely.
And I mean, he knows much more about games than I do, so I take his word on that kind of stuff. Hopefully, I think we
like giant cool miniatures also. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So
cool.
you kind of build a lot on your own games, really, and not play as many other ones, you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know. That's just the way I've always done it. My wife jokes that I'm the hermit of the industry, because I don't know. I've spent the past 11 years kind of flying under the radar. I've got my fans, but I've just always kind of designed in a bubble. So that was probably one of the biggest and best things for my game design career was joining with Kolossal, because it opened up so much more development than I ever had access to, even if I'd wanted to go out and search for it. I mean, you got Travis, Chris Ham, Chris Beyer, who's the graphic designer, is big into the play testing, AJ Lambeth. There's just everybody at Colossal just loves games, and you can really tell. I can tell this how much time and love and sweat went into this to get to where it's at.
And it's great too when you're a developer, when you play a game and you've played it 100 times and you still enjoy playing it. I think that's very telling. And I think Mezo is definitely one of those games. It's one of those games where every chance I have to play it, when we're like, hey, we need to play it, we need to test this guy, hey, we made a small tweak, when you do that, I'm like, I'm in. So
Now, one thing, you mentioned other content coming, but I mean, I haven't seen this other content myself, but this is the base game here. And there's a lot of stuff right in just the base game.
Yes, there's a lot. So you have each player is going to have 17 miniatures, personal miniatures. So 8 shamans, 8 warriors, and a champion. You're going to have these 4 gigantic gods. There's a ton of tokens. There's your god's personal deck. There's cards. Just lots and lots of content.
And a lot of it's customizable, and because you have the Wrathful God tiles that
modular, changes from game to game.
The altars change
from game to game. The gods, as you get, when you see the Kickstarter, there's going to be an option for 5 players. There's an option for a deluxe version of the game that has more gods. More gods means more options. More players means more options. There'll be more altars. There'll be more Wrathful tiles. There's all kinds of content. So
I think even if you go in at the base, you're getting a lot of game.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean,
for sure.
I think, and I don't know. I'm partial.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. The miniatures are really well done. Everything seems to be coming together to make this big, grandiose game. How long would you say a typical game session lasts?
I would say, your first game, it's like when I was trying to explain to you yesterday on the phone. It's got some concepts that I think you got to wrap your head around a little bit. But once you get into it, the game moves quicker. It's one of those games where there's 3 ages. I think the first age usually takes the longest because you're trying to figure out why you're doing things, where you should be doing them, how they work. I'd say a first play, if someone knows the rules and is teaching the game, it should be about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours with 4 players. You can get that down to, in the office we play in about an hour and 15 minutes with 4 players all the time.
Yeah, like when we played earlier, I think the last 2 ages were the first age was almost as long as the second 2 ages.
Yeah, it was.
So
actually,
it's once you figure out, because the ages build off of each other, but once you're familiar with the concept and everything during the first age is almost kind of like I don't want to say a training age, but getting used to the game age.
Well, even the setup, you don't really do a lot of setup. Like part of the actual game of playing the game, the deploying and everything is almost setup. So the setup is almost interspersed into the actual gameplay.
And once you know what you're doing, it's a lot quicker in the second and third age. So I don't know, which is kind of how I wanted it to scale, and I wanted things to go out at the beginning of each age. So I can't say enough how pleased I am with the development job that Kolossal did with this. So
the game has a sort of a death cycle in it where your people are dying and then you're having to do active things to bring them back.
Yeah.
Where'd you get kind of like the idea for that flow, ebb and flow of people dying and coming back?
Well, like I said, the Mayans were, among other things, a death culture, a blood culture. So, and there's several tales of heroes going to the underworld to try to rescue people. So I wanted this. When your guys died, they died. Like a lot of games, when your guys die, you get
just
back.
come home and then you put them back out without any feeling of consequence.
Things go over here, but you get a benefit for it, right? I mean, you can sacrifice your guys to get additional resources in the game, additional points, additional abilities and actions. But you kind of hamstring your opponents when you send their units back, to the Jabolba, because they don't get them back to their reserves. And it's also going back,
But sometimes I found myself in a weird position where I wanted someone to die.
Yeah.
So that I could bring them back and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And there's some trade. It's kind of cool too. It wasn't necessarily something that I had planned on, but as the design process and development process went in, it's really cool because you can turn your warrior into a shaman. You can turn your shaman into a warrior, because it's kind of a thematic rebirth kind of thing. But you can send a shaman here to get a warrior back from Jabolba, or you can send a warrior here to get a shaman back from Jabolba.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
So it's almost like a transformation kind of thing, which is really cool. But no, and again, going back, talking about balancing stuff, it's, exiling a unit, which is basically sending it back to the player who it belongs to, is less powerful than smiting a unit, which sends it to Jabolba. So that's an easy way to balance things. If you got one god who wants to kill stuff, maybe you give them a little bit more exile and less smite. That way they're killing stuff more, but it's not quite as powerful.
Yeah. I think the thing that's cool also about the whole the cycling aspect is when you look at other games, like we were saying, these other area control games, you lose, your guys get blown off the border, they come home. Now in this game, at the end of every fight, everybody comes home, right? So it's not this idea where I just have guys out on the board and I'm slowly amassing oh cool, I have 20 guys in the third age in this one area because I just kept putting things here over and over.
Oh,
and
yeah,
over.
there's none of that. The game is constantly forcing you to reevaluate and recycle.
Yeah,
which there's not much defensive turtling.
Yes.
No,
there's no retreat. I mean, there's retreating within. If you think you're going to lose and you have the ability to move your guys, but there is no inbuilt retreating mechanism. It's not like in Kemet or something where I come in, we fight, I lost, and now I have to run away. It's like we fight, everybody comes home.
Yeah. It's cool. I wanted one of the things that has survived, from that time period in this culture are its monuments. It's, temples and pyramids and stone glyphs and the things they built. And I wanted that to kind of shine through the game, that throughout the ages, the things that stayed were the stone edifices. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think also the fact that there's a feeling of this consequence of cost. So, the bottom card of every god has that ceremonial action, which is admittedly a weaker action, but you can then sacrifice guys over here to pick one of these other options, which, the game has this great feeling of progression, I think. Your god's ability gets stronger with each age. Your first tribe ability gets stronger with each age. You have an ability that scales toward the level of devotion, so the more people believe in you, the more powerful this effect gets. And I think this also, the Wrathful ability is a neat thing, where the more each age we see more abilities, and the abilities get progressively better. So now I can sacrifice guys to get a kind of a customized effect, which I think that was one of his ideas that I thought was just really, really cool and inspired. Modular, like this just feeling of kind of everything interconnecting. That's really a neat aspect of the game.
Well, if this game sounds interesting, I believe it's on Kickstarter right now as this video goes out, or if you're watching it in like 2019, the game's probably out now and you can get it. Depends on on that.
Yeah, for sure.
So check out the Kickstarter for that. Any last things you want to say before we can wrap this up here?
No, absolutely. I mean, we had a great time. We really appreciate you guys checking out the game, and thanks for watching the video. And
all right, well,
see you guys over the campaign.
This is Mezo. Well, this is Mezo. This is the box cover here. And I'd like to thank Travis and John for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Well, I'm Tom Vasel. We'll see you next time.